I kind of grew up in a family where alcohol was just there, but it wasn't there. It was like the central piece. It was something even more than just a cocktail or two. It was so ingrained in my life starting at age 0.
Mm.
And so much so that I remember, walking around my parents' cocktail parties with, things of wine on a platter when I was like 9 or 10, or bartending starting at like age 12.
I'm knocking doors down with Ben Tuff. Why did I want to talk to Ben? Well, his Swim Tuff documentary, how he swam his way out of the bottle, is about to drop. As well, Ben is coming up on 11 years sober. And through his sober journey, he found the peace and tranquility of swimming. And in his documentary, Ben sets off to be the first person to swim from Providence, Rhode Island to Jamestown, Rhode Island, to raise money for the environmental nonprofit Clean Ocean Access. It's going to be an amazing adventure to follow. Hear Ben's story, be inspired, reach out. And I have to say, this conversation with Ben has led me to see that, much like all of you, I've got the power inside to achieve anything that I put my mind and energy and focus towards. I guarantee you're going to enjoy this. While you're checking Knocking Doors Down out, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you get a lot out of this podcast, share with a friend. And don't forget the archive of interviews we have. Bam Margera, Brandon Novak, Kat Von D, Charlie Sheen, Edward Furlong, Kelly Osborne. The list goes on and on of amazing guests that have been on the podcast, sharing how they have found purposeful lives. Speaking of purpose, how about a lifestyle brand with purpose? 5150 LTM. That's right. Not only is it a lifestyle brand that can fit whatever it is you're trying to achieve in life, but they give back to the community. Right now, I am wearing my new 5150 hat, warm leather jacket. As well, I got my new 5150 joggers on that I like to wear around the winter time. And you, the listener of Knocking Doors Down, get 20% off every time you shop at 5150 LTM. All you have to do is use the code KDD20 at checkout and get 20% off. And of course, I said it helps within the community. And how does 5150 give back to the community? Portions of the sales benefit the Carlos Vieira Foundation. Their 3 amazing programs: the Race to End the Stigma, the Race for Autism, and the Race to be Drug-Free. More on the Carlos Vieira Foundation. Go to carlosvierafoundation.org. It's the shits, as they would say.
Yeah.
Man. No, but Vermont, you're probably not getting too much swimming in right now at this point.
I actually do manage to get to the pool, if not every day, then definitely every other. And
indoor, or are you one of those guys that's bold enough to do like the ice bath type stuff?
yeah, well, I think I would do the ice bath kind of stuff, but I made a rule for myself that when I went out swimming, it had to be something I looked forward to. Otherwise, I would make excuses, sort of like when I used to run. Like I used to go running and I would find any excuse not to run. And if I was swimming outside in really uncomfortable weather or doing those ice bath things, I would be like, no way. I'd rather go on the Peloton today.
Well, I do want to know more about a lot of the stuff you're doing. The documentary that you're working on surrounding, you're doing such amazing charitable work through your recovery process. But, Ben, I'm always kind of curious, like, here I am talking to this guy, really switched on doing all these things. I know how I fell into the bottle. How, looking back, do you think you fell into the bottle?
Well, I think I was kind of shoved in there at an early age. Coming from the youngest of 6, my oldest brother was 10 years older than me. And growing up, my twin brother and I, we were kind of like in the background a little bit. We were the double mistake at the end. And my dad was really busy working. And then my mom was working as a real estate agent. And I kind of grew up in a family where alcohol was just there, but it wasn't there. It was like the central piece. It was something even more than just a cocktail or two. It was so ingrained in my life starting at age 0. And so much so that I remember, walking around my parents' cocktail parties with, things of wine on a platter when I was like 9 or 10, or bartending starting at like age 12. And it's not like I got into drinking that early. I really didn't start drinking until 16 or 17. But that was out of fear because I was just really worried about drinking, and I was such a hypochondriac. I had so many anxiety attacks. I had a lot of stress growing up. And I remember one time my mom came downstairs into the kitchen, and it was like pretty late. It was like 12 o'clock, and it was a school night. And she said, "What are you doing up?" I said, "I'm having a panic attack." Like, I didn't call it a panic attack, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, "I don't know what to do. Like, I feel like I'm going to die. I think I need to go to the hospital." And she went into the other room, and she came back with a shot of vodka, and she said, "Here you go. This will help you. And this will help you just go back to bed after this." So always in the back of my mind, I had been accustomed to people around me, especially family, drinking and having any excuse to drink. Stress, anxiety, celebratory. No matter what it was, there was an excuse for it. And it was at age 16, 17, I guess my end of my sophomore year of high school, that I started to drink and kind of party on the weekends and experience my first hangovers and all that not so fun stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting you talk about that, because gentleman that's been on here, Darren Prince, he talks about, being a very shy kid, having some learning disabilities, goes off to camp, stomach pains, whatever, not fitting in, doesn't want to do the social stuff or the performance stuff, and goes to the nurse's office, and they give him the little green drink, and all of a sudden, whoa, all that went away. And it's interesting that you said something, but maybe you meant it more comically, but I definitely felt it, like where you said, the mistake at the end of the children, kind of thing. Did you carry that? Because I felt like such a freaking burden as a child, and I don't know where that came from. I don't. My mom certainly never did anything to make me feel that way. I don't recollect, if my dad did per se.
Well, it was sort of like under the impression that once the twins came around in our family, like, there weren't any rules anymore. My brothers and sisters had already broken them all, and my parents knew they didn't really work. So it was kind of like free reign, and it was pretty good for us. But at the same time, everything was that much busier when it was our turn to grow up and experience things. So it's not that we didn't get the same amount of attention, but the attention we got was just a different kind of attention. It wasn't so much a parental, you need to do this, and this. It was more of a peer relationship with my parents. And again, my dad was traveling a lot because he was a businessman, and he tried and make it to as many games or to as many dinners as he could, but he wasn't always around.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. My dad is a business owner, truck driver, gone a lot, late nights, all that stuff, and of course, as well, growing up in a home of addiction. But it's weird. That hypochondriac, though. I've been trying to reflect on that. I don't know about. I got a lot of gaps in childhood. When do you think, and where do you think that started? Why the constant worry?
I knew exactly where it started. In second grade, one of my teammates on my baseball team His name was Alex Rumetz. I haven't talked to him since then, but he was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I remember, like, throughout that season, he ended up in the final game of the season. His brother was an unbelievable athlete and he wasn't so great. And it was a wonderful life lesson for my twin brother and me, because Alex pitched that last game and his brother should have been pitching, but he pitched it because everyone thought it was going to be the last little league game he ever played. And he ended up going in remission and doing great. But literally from the second I found out about that, I was convinced I had cancer. And all time, I've had every single cancer in my life inside my head. And when you have that mentality, for me, that makes for a really, really good alcoholic, because it's a disease of the brain. And it was very easy for me to drink my way through problems and through my mind games that I played with myself, and it was those debilitating panic attacks. It never happened while I was drinking. It always happened either when I was hungover and like super anxious, or it happened just randomly during the week.
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot of what you're saying there with that. It's the off switch. It's the off switch. I spoke at a high school, couple of classes, and young lady asked me about that. And, I was a late bloomer, kind of started drinking, maybe late teens, early 20s, but it wasn't anything but a drink here and there. But about mid 20s is when it took off. And I said, it's just, it became the off switch of everything, And I got like the rock star crazy creative too. I would write all these notes, then go back to work. I worked in radio and they're like, what the F were you doing last night? It's like, this is nuts. No, it'll work. Try it. Trust me. I know what you're saying about that. How long did this persist? When did you really start to just think, gosh, when did you have the first thoughts? I don't want this problem anymore, this burden.
Well, it was funny. Like I remember my mom said, if you have one more of these anxiety attacks and we have to go to the hospital, or if something's really wrong with you, I'm going to take you to a psychiatrist.
Oh.
And of course I had one like a week later, and she took me to the scariest psychiatrist in all of Atlanta, I think. And this guy, he had like the accent, he had like the cards and the big glasses. He was probably like 70 years old. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely not coming back to this guy. Like it was such a bad thing. So from that point on, if anything, I just learned to internalize it a little bit more and not express it, which, as many of us know, is probably the worst thing you can do, because keeping that all inside is a recipe for disaster. But it didn't stop me, especially later on after college, from using alcohol to if I was depressed, I would drink. If I was on cloud nine, I was totally psyched, fired up, nice summer day, I would drink. If I was kind of feeling anxious about anything, I would drink. If I was feeling like somebody had wronged me or I needed to get back at someone, I would drink. And the excuses just kept going on until the point where about 14, 15 years ago, I was a nightly drinker. I was hiding the drinks from my wife and from my family. And I was so sick that I would always have a $20 bill in the back of my wallet. I would get it with cash back when I went to the grocery store so that my wife would never see it on any receipt or ATM. I'd go to the liquor store like sometime during the day. I worked at a school, and I would buy a pint of vodka, the 100 proof, whatever it was, and I would buy 2 vitamin waters. I'd sip them both down just below the labels, and then I would fill them up and then seal them up, put them in my backpack, and I was ready to go. And I'd have one of those that night, and then I'd be good for the next night. And I would also have, a bunch of beers after that, just to continue it and to cover it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But that road was a short one, and my existence unraveled very, very quickly.
Wow. Yeah. I remember, talking about those hiding things when I was married, having an extra cooler in the garage. And so when it was, hey, can you go buy us more beer? We're out. Sure. Show up with 130 pack that went in the house, one that went out there. Hey, I got stuff to do out in the garage. So when it looks like I'm having 3 beers, I'm having 6 or 9. You know what I'm saying? So I had my hiding techniques, and as the guy that always did the recycling, it's like, crush the cans, put them in the bin. Who's going to know? And it's just this sneaky crap that we do to just continue to, lie to everybody else before we want to tell ourselves the truth.
Right. And I thought I was so smart for some reason. I don't know why, but I thought I was like the smartest person in the world. But at the same time, about probably 6 months into the switch to vodka, because I was doing it with beer on the way home, like drink your 24 ouncer, and I just find somewhere to throw it out, like at the garbage bin or whatever, and then go home. But it wasn't too long until literally I could not keep it going, and I could not keep functioning at that level. And I would find excuses to make it earlier and earlier and earlier in the day, and it got to the point where I was just like obliterated by the time it was time for bed, like 9 o'clock at night. And yet there was no alcohol in the house. And my wife was like, what is going on? Like, how is this happening? And it was just me. It was me playing mind tricks on myself. And when I was drinking those vitamin waters, I convinced myself that it was just a vitamin water.
Oh, yeah.
It was such a scary existence because I was 100% convinced that that's what it was. I didn't even think about the vodka.
Wow. Yeah, that's a trip. I remember in a meeting, a guy had said something very similar, and it made me ponder, because I was more of if it was hard alcohol like rum or whiskey or something like that, but with soda, of course. And it was like, no, I'm just having an adult soda. It was the BS thing that I rationalized with myself. It's crazy how our mind and our reward system goes so far that we are literally, one part of our brain's lying to the other part of our brain to keep it freaking going on our way to our death.
Right. And there was one point, it was probably, so I'll be 11 years sober this April 21st.
Right.
So it would have been somewhere around 11 years ago right now or so. And I was driving back, and I stopped on the dirt road back to our house, and I looked in the rear view mirror, and I remember this so well because I had the shakes. I had the shakes all day long, sweating, and I looked in the mirror and I said, "You have a problem, Ben. You have a problem. Like, this is an issue. Like, you can't ignore this anymore."
Yeah. What was so you said you were working at a school. I mean, what was happening? Like work. People don't believe me at the level I was drinking to still, maintain my job, actually do well at it.
It was, and my responsibilities were so vast. I was an advisor. I had 11 8th grade boys who lived in the house with our family in the dorm. I taught English classes. I worked in admissions. I worked in fundraising, and I coached 3 varsity sports. And I was able, one of the nice pieces of my personality is I can get distracted really easy. And especially around kids who I connect with more than with grownups.
Sure.
I was able to make it work through those connections and by distracting myself throughout the day until I could finally have that drink. And I just powered through some horrendous hangovers.
Yeah. Oh, I still have at times I'll get the some of the toxic dreams and wake up like, oh God, thank goodness I'm sober. And the thing that I remembered the most is that illness of a hangover. And like I keep that really, really close to the chest.
Oh man, like that feeling is unlike any feeling. And what we would do to combat it, whether it was like, I remember there's one time that I ended up just like chugging a bunch of beers at like 6 o'clock in the morning during the summertime, and just being like, oh, like, okay, I feel somewhat normal again. But I remember I asked when I was right out of rehab, I called my sponsor and I was like, I keep having these like really vivid drinking dreams, and like I feel it's like my fault, and that when I wake up I actually am responsible for it and shouldn't be sober. Like, what do I do? And he said, those are called freebies and you got to just learn to enjoy them. I was like, okay. I could look at it that way, but sure enough, as time went on and the role of alcohol has thankfully so much lessened over the years, I don't have those dreams as much. I do have a dream that from now and again about relapsing, because that for me is such a huge fear. And I get this dream that for some reason I like drink a beer or an alcoholic drink, and then I say to myself, you're no longer you're zero, you're starting all over again.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And see, I like that for me. I don't know about you. I'm sure you've sponsored people and maybe people that have fallen off and in some of that self-judgment of it that people tend to have. I know I did with my relapse. See, look, everything I believed about myself being a loser and a piece of trash, it's all true, Like, how do you, maybe in talking with some of the newcomers about that, kind of help them frame it to not go back into that shame spiral? Because that's the easiest way to fall off and keep going.
Right. And, for me, and again, one of the reasons why I decided to make the film that I did was there's so much negativity associated with recovery, and there's so much negativity even within the recovery world. And I talk to sponsees or friends or relatives who go to AA meetings, and they're like, this is like Debbie Downer, like this is the worst experience ever, everything is like wah wah wah, and it's not a positive thing. But my approach to sobriety is to embrace it and make it the most amazing thing possible. And I do that because if it wasn't for the fact that I got sober, there is no way that I would be the person doing the things that I'm doing today. And at the same time, you can't enjoy life and enjoy those around you until you learn to love yourself. And if you are an addict and you have yet to find recovery, it is very, very difficult. And I'm talking about me now. It was for me very, very difficult to love myself.
Mm. Yeah. I think it's hard no matter what as a person, right? I forget what the self-help book was, like the best-selling self-help book in the 70s, and the first thing was life is hard. And it just is. And I think so many of us, I forget if I came up with it, like amalgamized from somebody else or what it was, or one of my mentors, but no outside solutions to inside problems.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in such a society now where it's like everybody's a freaking victim for everything. You can be offended by everything that goes on. It goes from a moral issue to a person. I'm just offended. It's just it's tough, and I can relate about. There was many AA groups I just stopped going, and my sponsor actually lives 6 hours away from me. He goes, "Why did you stop going to those meetings?" I go, "It felt like everybody there was looking for a solution, and not accepting the solution is I just can't drink." Like they were looking for something to just go, and I can get back. And, the thing, I'll switch from the beer to the wine, and only vodka, and only on Friday nights, and only, only mimosas. It was like I can't be here around this. This is not positive. This is not solution based, and by the end, and like people sidebarring, it's like everybody is just judging each other. Like, well, you that, I didn't do that. It's like, what is the point of that? So I get where it's like, yeah, sometimes it's hard to bring some newcomers in if you can't share the story of, yeah, like yours, I was here, but look what I'm doing now. And without that elimination of my substance of choice, I wouldn't be here.
When I first got to rehab, and I didn't find this out until many years later, but I went down to Silver Hill Hospital down in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I tell everyone it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And while I was down there, I was also diagnosed with bipolar, and through that process of learning why I had these crazy thoughts, and I was up and down all the time, that helped bring a little bit of clarity to my life. And I said to Rocky, who still is my doctor, and I said to him a few years after I got out, and I said, Rocky, what did everyone think of me at the hospital? Like when I got there, like what was their impression? And they're like, Ben, we didn't want you to do anything because you were just too damn happy all the time. Like almost to the point that we thought that something was wrong with you or you were trying to trick us because you were just so positive. And I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah. I can just imagine. I got this picture like being in rehab with you, like this SOB here over here, always happy. I haven't had a drink in 3 days. And,
yeah. I drove people crazy because I was like, okay, who wants to go? Like, it's free time. Let's go play some tennis. Come on, let's go. They're like, are you serious? Like, just chill out. Like, let us just do our thing. I was, and that's just part of who I am. I'm always ready to do something. And it's one of the reasons why for me, I think found so much success in sobriety, because I'm always ready for the next thing, always eager to keep it as positive as possible. And at the same time, I get the most reward from helping others, especially for those that are suffering. And if I can help others, then it's sort of like a puzzle to me. Each one is a puzzle, and I just want to undo it all and get them to the point that I am.
Yeah. I had to start, and it was ironic. It was helped me about 2 months ago. It was an interview with George Carlin. I forget who was interviewing him. And, they're talking about his comedy. I think he's the most brilliant comedian ever, myself, for my taste. And he talked about like not giving a darn about society as a whole anymore, but the individual, and for me, it was like, oh, I want to, impact so many different people, go into an AA meeting if I'm a speaker and have this thing and everybody, applauds because it made them feel, not for me, but the story and to see it. And I realized when he said, no, you can see a universe in an individual's eyes before all these things, dogma and everything else starts to erode them when there's a collective, and there was something about that was really impactful, that it was like, oh, okay, if I can just that one person, that one other person at a time, it helped me just kind of, I guess there was some ego there that I wasn't able to see. Like, I've been given this gift. I look at my addiction as a gift, and my recovery a greater one. That, okay, maybe it's the newcomer, maybe it's the older individual that's had 40 years and they lost their spouse, and that's a big trigger. I don't know. The universe will let me know.
100%. And I often introduce myself as the most thankful alcoholic on the planet, because I've just been able to, everything just seemed to have aligned in the last 11 years in such a way that it's made it all worth it. And there's no way that I would have the mindset that I have now if I hadn't have gone through what I went through as a user and as an alcoholic.
Yeah. What was you had mentioned that, and I forget what term you used, but essentially when the wheels fell off, what was that point of acknowledgement? And then asking help? Was it coming home to the missus like, I need help, this is what's going on? What, for those just listening, Ben made this look like, oh, hell no.
Okay, so I was such a wimp, and I've always had a hard time asking for help. I still do. It's one of my weaknesses. I'll recognize that. And I had a panic attack, and I asked my wife to take me to the hospital, and we went into the hospital. We went into like the triage room, and we were in there for like 2 hours, and they didn't admit us. And I'm like, I get the nurse. I'm like, what the heck? It was 11:30 in the afternoon or in the morning. And I said to the nurse, I said, are you going to admit us or admit me? And she said, we will as soon as your blood alcohol level gets below the legal limit. So it was 11:30, and I'd stopped drinking at 8:30 the night before. My liver functioning was not at the greatest after doing what it had been doing for so long. And I didn't know until I went to rehab that like you could have like 3 shots or you could have 30 shots and it would affect you the same depending on how your liver was like functioning that day. So I kind of looked over at my wife like she didn't know I had been drinking. Oh. And she said, what? How is that possible? And when your stomach just kind of like hits the bottom, and I said, okay, let's go. I'm ready. I want help. I want to go to rehab. I've got a serious problem. Let's figure it out. And I just started crying. And, luckily my brother Alex was at the other end of a phone, figured out everything for me to go to Silver Hill. I was in detox at Torrington Hospital in Connecticut, which is like not the place that you want to be for a long period of time sure. with a lot of users, but like pretty hefty users from the streets and sure. what have you. And that was probably the best eye-opener for me, as I met some of these guys that had been in detox for like the 11th or 12th time. Right. And then I go from there to this unbelievable facility with all these other guys living in an awesome house together, working through their addictions. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't so much I had a choice. I guess I did, because I would have lost everything if I didn't make the right choice.
Yeah, choices can Choices are a son of a bitch in life at times, that's for sure. But so talking about the place where you detoxed, and I'm gonna guess probably 11 years ago, probably a lot of heroin, methamphetamines. What are kind of some of the things that you can still recollect for you that was eye opening?
Well, it was funny because I was still under this. I was so clueless as to what recovery was.
Mm.
And I didn't realize the first 3 days that you're supposed to go to these group meetings and of like talking to people coming from AA and what have you. And I I realized very quickly that the people who were on that floor with me were exactly like me. They may have come from different walks of life, but we all had this common bond of addiction, which kind of bound us together. The unfortunate part is that I was the only one on that floor with the finances to go to a real rehab facility, which is one of the most limiting factors in so many people getting sober. And, for that, I feel a little bit of guilt, but I also feel very fortunate that I was able to do that.
Yeah. I work for a nonprofit in Fresno, California, and the founder, he owns a rehab facility as well. And that's some of our biggest conversations about the fact that insurance is such a joke. Of course, I know primarily California. I'm not sure about other states, but boy, yeah, getting someone, if let alone if they're a transient person, it's almost nil. You're not going to have any success. And if you have, let's say, state government healthcare, whatever it is, if the local county, health facility might be able to help you out, but as far as, getting someone detoxed, forget it. With what's out there now, I mean, if they're a fentanyl addict, they might. It's just a nightmare. It's a scary situation, and I've let, for me, I guess, as you're doing, and I want to get into the swimming where it started, and I mean, geez, you continue to raise money for so many wonderful different causes, organizations. But that's kind of where I've placed my servitude. Like, how can we help these people without making it some political thing? Because it always gets turned into that, just a human to a human. And that's the scariest thing about me. I don't know about in Vermont, but here in California, especially LA and San Francisco, it's just like, well, we're not going to arrest him anymore. Cool. So you're going to acknowledge it's a mental health issue and we're going to get him in a facility, a state run, and get something going. No, we're just going to leave him on the streets to go ahead and continue to shoot up or use. And especially like with fentanyl now, they're just finding people all over the place. And,
Right.
what is it? Trank, where it's nilazine mixed with the fentanyl and it's literally rotting people's limbs off where they're in jet. It's like, how is this the humane thing? How do we go from, we're not going to lock them up anymore, which won't do anything, because lots of them go in and still find their drugs and become better criminals to continue to fill their habit if and when they get out. But we're just going to leave them on the streets to die.
Right. And the fact is that, I'm not going to blame my addiction on my mental health, but it didn't help it. Being bipolar, and there's so many people with undiagnosed mental illness, due to, insurance coverage, due to stigma, due to lack of accessibility. And, for me, it's a two-pronged approach with these addicts, because you can't treat the addiction without also treating the mental health piece. And I'm also, if I could send everybody to rehab, whether they drink or whether they have an addiction or not, like, I would, because you learn so much about yourself, and you finally get that emotional support, and you get the coping skills that you might have never picked up on earlier in your life. And then you get to start all over. And it's such a cool thing.
Yeah. I joke Ben off and I'm like, we should work on curriculum that's 12-step based for every high school in the country. But then you'll have teenagers going home going, wow, my parents are really emotionally immature.
But that's the truth, especially in today's world. I've spent 21 years dealing with a lot of parents, and it's amazing how many of them are just clueless.
Yeah, or don't care, or genuinely don't care.
Right.
Like I see it. I don't know about you with your experience. I'm worried for all young individuals. They are facing things that you and I growing up just didn't have, and I'll tell them that when I go and speak of them. Like, you'll probably hear adults go, well, when you're my age, and it's like, no, your guys, everyone at every age faces something tough. That's just reality. That's life, how it is. And you guys are facing a whole multitude of things that I wasn't confronted with, that I didn't have to deal with. If there was social media with my depression in high school, somebody probably said, something terrible to me. Who knows what that would have done,
Right.
Who knows? It's unfathomable what they're dealing with. But yeah, I think if we could get 12-step curriculum in high schools, it'd be a great thing for the world in general.
For sure. For sure.
So how did we start then through your recovery journey? Just, you're an active guy, you're a doer. When was the point that, I don't know. I'm a storyteller, so I kind of vision this night. You're sitting there reading, the missus reading, you look at her and you go, I'm going to swim and raise money for causes I believe in.
I wish it worked like that, but it was, so I was at Silver Hill, and I heard this guy talk. He was from Ireland, had an awesome Irish accent. And someone before the meeting, I was so nervous about finding a sponsor. And I was like, I feel like I'm like asking someone out on a date. I don't know who it's going to be. Like, this is like really awkward. And meanwhile, I wasn't used to being in social situations without having a good buzz on. So I hear him talk, and he talks about how he was a former marathon runner and how he was doing triathlons. And I was like, that's so cool. Like, he's got to be my sponsor. So I went up to him after the meeting and I said, Ken, will you be my sponsor? He was like, yeah, I'll be your sponsor. And I said, oh, and do you think I could learn how to swim? Because I'd love to do triathlons like you, because that sounds so cool. He was like, yeah, like I learned how to swim. No problem. You can do it. So right after I got out of rehab, 5 weeks later, I got a gym membership, and I kind of taught myself how to swim. I could swim a little bit, but like not proper swim. So I ended up doing 1 length, 2 lengths, and then 4 lengths, and then 8 lengths. And after 3 months, I'd done enough to be swimming like a quarter of a mile. So I signed up for a sprint triathlon, and I actually did okay. Like, I was kind of middle of the pack for the swim. I was like, that was awesome. And I did triathlon for about 7 years, really competitively. But the problem is that I have a really competitive mentality. And for me, if you're ever doing something that is no longer enjoyable as an activity or a sport, you probably should switch and find something new. And I found myself at the starts, like looking at people's calves and looking how old they were. I'm like, I'm going to kick your butt. I'm going to kick your butt. Like, and it was just like, this is so, I was like, you're crazy. I would go home and be like, and I was doing well, and I was ready to be just done with it. So I did a like 2-mile swim in Rhode Island, and I was like, that was not bad at all. Like, I can do that. And I signed up for a 12.5-mile swim around Key West, which was the Florida Keys Community College swim. And it was really hot, but I thought, you know what? Great excuse to go down to the Keys for a weekend to take my twin brother down there, who's also in sobriety, and we'll have a blast. He'll be my support kayaker, and we'll do it. And it was not a piece of cake, but it wasn't bad. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, like I can keep going with this. And from that point on, I did a 20-mile swim around the island of Jamestown, and then a 19-mile swim from Block Island to Jamestown. And then I swam the whole distance of Narragansett Bay from Providence all the way down to Jamestown, Rhode Island. So,
Wow.
um, and the best thing about it is that, like, I'm not even like a really good swimmer. Like, if anybody watches my movie, like real swimmers, they'd be like, dude, seriously, look at your catch, look at your pull, like, look at your kick, look at your breathing. You're not a great swimmer, but I don't care because I
Yeah.
just do it for myself. I'm not doing it for anyone else. Um,
Oh,
and at the same time, I needed something else to kind of motivate me and to
sure.
hold me accountable. And in the same way that I encourage people who want to try something new, like swim or run a 5K or do a 10K or run a marathon, I just make them sign up for one. I say, okay,
Hmm.
let's find one that'll be fun. You're going to sign up for it. And if you back out at the end, it's not a big deal. And that used to be enough for me. But then I said, okay, I got to put a little bit more out there because these swims are getting kind of long and ridiculous. So there was a environmental group in Rhode Island called Clean Ocean Access, and over the last 3 swims, I've raised just over $250,000 for them, and it's been awesome because when I go and I do those races, about halfway in, um, my friend Liz, who does all the fundraising with me, she'll yell out what my grand total is as the money's coming in. And I'll know that, I have 500 people who are backing me right then and supporting me. And some people give for Clean Ocean Access because they know it's a great cause. But a lot of people also give because of the sobriety piece, because of what I represent in the world of sobriety. And I'm so outspoken in it, in the news and in the newspaper and what have you, that it ends up becoming sort of a message saying to the people out there, like, it's okay. Like,
Yeah.
you can do this like Ben does. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, yeah, whatever the thing is that you find, maybe they're not like you in a gung ho and type of person, but it could be like, could be something simple. And I love it,
Right.
man. I gotta, yeah, we're gonna put for those listening or watching, the link is in the podcast description for the documentary. So please check it out because it's some powerful stuff. It might make you switch some mindsets. I do want to ask about the bipolar. Because I take a very mild form of a very low dose of medication for my depression. How did you start to confront the bipolar once you were going through your recovery journey? What are some of the things that help you maintain? I know some people take medication, some don't if they don't have to.
So yeah, my psychiatrist started me out on a medication and then kind of titrated me down to the
Mm.
lowest level. So I'm below like therapeutic level on my medication. Uh, but it's funny because in the beginning of my sobriety, I used it as an excuse. And whenever I shared it, I'd say, well, I'm suffering from bipolar, and that led to my drinking. That and I realized in time that for me, it wasn't the bipolar that led to the drinking. It just was a coexisting condition for me that it was not helped by the drinking.
No.
And uh, it it was, I would say, probably a year into my sobriety when I would talk about bipolar when I had to in meetings or when it came up, but other than that, I just talk about recovery a little bit more openly now.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, because there's a lot of stigma around that too. I mean, I've had some people, I don't know about you, but You're taking something, you're not sober. It's like, well, no offense, I don't want to be the guy that's doesn't want to get out of bed for a week either. So
Right.
if
Right.
it's something where I can do this, and like you, where it's just such a minor thing, yeah, well, who are you to sit and judge? I mean, there's so much stigma around any form of harm reduction that is out there. People that maybe like those folks when you were in detox, maybe what is helping them is a teeny little tiny amount of methadone or Suboxone, and it keeps them from returning to the streets and getting illicit drugs and shooting up and dying. Like, well, who am I to sit and place some judgment upon that? Like,
As and as an educator in this world, I learned pretty quickly with the ADD ADHD drugs that are out there and so overly prescribed. I tell kids and I tell their parents, and very explicitly, that as soon as the side effects outweigh the benefits, you need to stop.
mm-hmm.
And there are so many parents that are like, oh, like little Joey can't do his work without his Ritalin or his Adderall. And then little Joey's complaining to me he hasn't eaten in a week and can't sleep at night. There needs to be a thinking behind that. And for me, it's the same thing. Like, if for the medication that I take, some of the like bad side effects would be like lethargic and sleeping too much. And I'm swimming around islands and like working out more than any human being that I hang out with anyway. So I'm doing just fine.
Yeah.
And to each their own, whatever keeps you doing the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and you nailed it there. It's with any situation when the side effects start to outweigh, I won't get off into our last, our last couple of years here in this world, but it's really disheartening. And I have such that huge concern for an undeveloped brain, that earlier than 26 really entering any sort of substance. God, I can't remember the actor's name now. He played Sully in Indiana Jones, and a friend of mine does these Comic-Cons in Canada, and he was having a conversation with him, and he was so passionate about that. Like, they are pumping a bunch of stuff into undeveloped brains. Like, a little kid. I was a rambunctious little kid. You know why? Because I was a little kid.
I still am a rambunctious little kid, and that's just not going to change.
Yeah, don't ever lose that, Ben. I love that about you, man. If you want to, we're going to jump into some random questions. I'm going to leave you with giving the final thoughts, but please tell people about where they can find the doc, maybe what your next swim is, how they can contribute.
Yeah, so I actually will be hitting the road. The documentary is going to be finished in about 3 weeks.
Okay.
So they're still writing the score for the music and touching up a few things. And then I'm going to be hitting the road actually all over the US, hitting up different film festivals. And we will be pitching the movie to Netflix, Amazon, HBO, Hulu, like the big ones. And then it will be picked up by one of them, most likely and hopefully. And it will be available to the masses. And I'm also going to start doing some screenings at recovery centers and at schools, and kind of making my way around the US to kind of just speak. And I am going to be focusing a lot on middle schoolers and upper schoolers, so grades 6 through 12, because in my mind they're the most clueless right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can help them have a better understanding of what addiction looks like and can look like, I feel that I can improve the chances of them getting help for themselves, getting help for one of their friends or getting help for a loved one, a family member. So everyone's like, well, there's no money in going to middle school and upper school kids, upper schools. I was like, well, I don't really care if there's money or not. It's about making a difference. And it will, my goal is to really connect with these kids, because I've already taken 4 of my former students to rehabs. I've got 2 at rehab right now. And they came to me because I've been open about my sobriety. It's not for everybody, and I totally understand that. But I feel like I'm here for a reason, and I got to make a difference for it. So you can always email me at bentuff@gmail.com if you have any questions or if you want to get a hold of me. And my website, which is going to be updated pretty soon with where I'll be, when I'll be there, is swimtuff.com.
Yeah. And again, the link is in the podcast description. All right, Ben, this is where we have some fun. All right. Of course, the random questions brought to you by 5150 LTM. Fabulous sponsor, couldn't do the podcast without them. All right. If you could have one superpower, what would it be? Not the one you already have. You don't get to use that one. That's too easy. So a super, like an X-Men type thing.
I would love to fly.
Yeah. Now, is it maybe for the same reason as me, and that's avoiding TSA, or just the enjoyment thereof?
Just the enjoyment thereof. I always have flying dreams. One of the greatest parts of my sobriety, I used to have them as a little kid, but now I get them all the time, and it's awesome.
Really? I used to as a kid too, like vivid enough, Ben, that I remember like flying, like it was a slow, like floating kind of thing down the ceiling of the house that I grew up in, like just almost skimming it. And to me, it's like, if I think back, it felt so real. Like,
yeah.
My brain's like, I don't know about that, but it's like, maybe. If you were stranded on a deserted island and you had one movie with you and one music artist's greatest hits, what would they be?
The movie that I would bring would probably be Shawshank Redemption. Never gets old. And the greatest hits, I would have to say, would have to be Peter Tosh.
Really? Right on.
So when I swim, I have a device called a Delphin, which is like a iPod, and it has music on it. And I listen to music for 15 hours during my whole swim. And the only music I listen to is reggae.
I'll be damned. That's cool, man. That's cool. Yeah, you can't beat Andy Dufresne, right? I mean, such a great movie. I want to ask a little bit about the swimming. What's the kind of prep? I mean, you're out there 15 hours. I do believe you get some kind of snackage, so to speak, but man, what is the kind of the calorie load and the training up to that? Because 15 hours, let alone the second part of that'll be, what was the trepidations about such long ocean swimming? Because as a kid that grew up on the coast in California, man, I learned about riptides at a pretty early age.
Yeah, so the tides and the wind are the biggest concern, and for that last swim, it was brutal. I averaged 2.1 miles per hour. There was 1 hour that I averaged about 120 yards because of the wind and the current. And yet my stroke rate stayed at 49.50 the whole time. So 2 swims ago, my biggest concern was sharks, because it's one of the top breeding grounds of the great white shark. And we actually pinged 2 very large great white sharks during the swim.
Was that when you were off the coast of the Carolinas?
That was off of Block Island.
Oh, okay.
Right. And I actually wore a shark leash, it's about 3 feet long. It puts off an electric current every 6 seconds or so, and it shocks all the water around you and supposedly keeps sharks at bay and they don't attack you. So I liked that piece. Um, at least in my head, I could tell myself, I'm okay. I'm not going to get bit by a shark. My calorie I burned in the last swim I did, I burned just over 9,000 calories over those 15 hours. And I managed to put in about 6,000 calories, which isn't too bad. And about 9 liters of water I drank along the way. So every 35 minutes, I would take a snack and some water. My snack of choice is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I just make it the day before and let it get soggy, and I just put it in my mouth and eat it half by half. I don't even chew it up. um, and that's how I get enough of the caloric intake to keep me going.
That is I was going to say banana sandwiches, but we'll just say peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, man. That is wild. Do you have to do ego checks with yourself? Because I'm going to tell you, you're an extraordinary person. This is not an average person thing. Is there times where you're like, okay, Ben, yes, this is pretty cool. You're doing it with the Pat, but don't let ego override, or the missus goes, hey, Ben, check that ego stuff right now.
I'm the total opposite of that kind of person, luckily.
Really?
So when a year and a half ago, Matt Corliss, who is the producer of this film, he did Free Solo. He worked on The Social Dilemma. He did Chasing Corals. He's done a lot of big films, and he did a 1 hour interview on the phone with me to see if he wanted to kind of take up this project. And I was like, Matt, I'm all for this, but I think a documentary about me is gonna be kind of boring. I don't really know what you're gonna get out of it. And he said, if you can keep that attitude, this is going to be the best movie I've ever made.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. And maybe that's also a reason why I like kids, like students, so much, because not only can I relate to them in my mentality, but they also bring you down to earth because they don't judge. And when you surround yourself with people that don't judge, you don't have to posture yourself, and you don't have to be someone bigger than who you really are. I'm an alcoholic who wants to do good in the world, who learned how to swim and does these crazy swims. That's kind of who I am. And if I can pass that on to others to help them figure themselves out and figure others around them out, then I'm good.
I was going to ask you for the final thoughts, but boy, I don't know. That might just be the place to stop right there, unless you have some additional wisdom or encouragement you want to drop on anyone that may be struggling. Maybe they have a loved one that struggle. We do get a lot of people that listen that have a loved one struggling with a mental health issue or addiction, or like you and I, the two, that you might want to share.
Well, as I've had a couple really tough situations with some young adults recently, and with parents having no idea what to do. There are resources out there, and if you find a great recovery center, if you find a great mental health provider, they can help walk you through it. Don't be afraid of that, and don't be afraid of the stigma that it might bring upon your family or about your child or whoever you're dealing with. And for me, I also talk a lot to people in early recovery or people in recovery who kind of have hit and oftentimes the reason why that wall is there is because we become so stuck in our ways that we forget to try new things, and we forget to mix it up. So no matter how old you are, no matter how difficult of a time you've had, it's never too late to try something new. I taught an 82-year-old man who is 48 years sober how to swim in Texas not that long ago. So that was a rewarding experience, and he loved it. So just go for it.
Ben, this has been a real pleasure.
No, likewise. Thank you for having me.
This is the Knocking Doors Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knocking Doors Down is all about.